Inheritance. The first time I took Grandpa's shotgun, he was gone. I believed that looking down that barrel would make me see the world clear, like putting on a pair of strong prescription lenses, that it would winnow down my confusion, and something true would be revealed on the other side of a kill shot. I've been close enough to death lately to be full of questions, starving for answers. That's why I'm out here looking for something alive I can aim at, as if killing would make dying more understandable. But now I don't know. I turned the shotgun around and pointed at my chest where all the pain lives. Grandpa told me never to point a gun at a person, but I know it's not loaded. I come back from the forest. This time of day, the sun is running a ridgeline along the trees, more shadow than light now. I step up on the porch and drop the shotgun against the clapboard so that it leans there with the dusk painting it red and orange against the rust-grained wooden wall. "Where you been?" Mom says when I walk into the house. "Just out," I say, and walk up the stairs to my bedroom. She doesn't know I took the shotgun, but I left it out there on the porch anyway. I go into my room and take out Grandpa's old beaten-up Bible and flip it open to a random page. It's a passage about how Jacob tried to grab Esau's foot to beat him out of the womb, like he had something to prove before he was ever even born. Grandpa had written some notes on the margin in his old cursive. God chose Jacob even though he was the lesser in character. Even though he was the lesser in character, I thought, he got to become father of the Israelites. And one of the things that made you care about Esau was that he was the better hunter, but he never bragged about it. It made him the favorite of their father, but God loved Jacob. The book was left to me when Grandpa went away because Dad figured I'd be the only one who'd care to read it. No one else in our house took any interest in such things. I don't know how much I really cared about them either, but for some reason, Grandpa thought I'd be the one who'd listen to his preaching. And I did. I put the Bible down and look out the window. The light is cross-fading to a narrow band far away over the trees in the distance. And I just kind of sit there and look at it, thinking that I'll watch it till it disappears completely. But before the sun is gone, I start thinking about Ezra and what he's doing in his shop this time of day. Probably locking boxes of bullets in that glass case below the register and pulling down the chinked wall in front of the store. I think about the shells in the case, and when I look up, the sun is gone. I go back downstairs, and Mom is still there in the kitchen polishing a glass with a dish rag. I sit down at the table, and she asks me where I've been again. I tell her that I've been hanging around with some of the boys from class because this time of year the days are getting longer and we like to be outside. She finishes polishing the glass and puts it in the cupboard. Then she comes over and sits down at the table. "You're not usually out that long," she says, placing her elbows on the clear plastic table cover and crossing her arms. "You eat anything today?" "Yeah, a couple sandwiches at Caleb's." "I ran into his mother last week at the co-op. She didn't say anything about you coming around." "Well, I don't always go in the house." "You left the porch light off. You know I keep telling you to leave it on in case another lynx comes around. I thought I heard something out there." I get up, walk over to the screen door, and look out. The shotgun is there, silhouetted against the wall where I left it. Then I walk back in the house and sit back down at the table. Nothing out there, I say. Grandpa took the shotgun out to the woods just about every Sunday. But he got sick, and the Bible took its place. He took to pacing back and forth across the living room, book in hand, looking like he was getting ready to march off to war. He wasn't always a religious nut. He used to swear up and down that the church was nothing more than a bunch of moralists trying to tell the rest of us how to live. But when senility took him, his Protestant upbringing somehow rose up in his brain and took over. A few days before my 12th birthday, he went limping, half naked, up and down Main Street, shouting about how Jesus was on his way back, and we'd all better prepare for the day of reckoning. The police got hold of him when he approached a group of children on a school outing, grabbed their teacher by the hem of her blouse, and rattled her back and forth while shouting, "Repent!" Sometimes in the middle of all that preaching, he would sit down at the kitchen table and stare at his hands like he was trying hard to remember something. And then he'd be back with us like he'd never been sick at all. So when the police brought him back and told my parents to put him in a home, my father was not ready to cash out the old man just yet. "You didn't remember to turn on the light," my mother said. I walk over to the door and flick the switch. It flickers to life and casts a thin crescent of pale light onto the dark lawn in front of the house. I walk back to the table, and for a minute I can't decide if I should sit down or keep going up the stairs. But her eyes tell me that our talk isn't finished, so I sit down again and stare at the photograph that hangs above the mantel. An old Indian voyager holding upright a leather snowshoe, the background of the tree line visible through its leather meshing. "So you're friends with Caleb again? I know you didn't talk for a while." "We've both changed, but it made us closer." "That's nice. It's important to have good friends." "We like the same music now." She looked at me for a minute without saying anything. Then she said, "I noticed Grandpa's rifle was missing from the rack this afternoon." The fridge kicked on in the corner. "I took it down yesterday. I just wanted to hold it for a minute." She flattened an air pocket in the table cover with her hands. "I've been meaning to replace this, you know." She smoothed it out again and looked up at me. "I left the shotgun on the porch," I said. "Okay, put it away in the morning." I get into bed. The image of the shotgun leaning against the wall out on the porch rings in my brain, and I remember when Grandpa ran away. He'd been getting worse and worse to the point where even his preaching got all tangled up, and he couldn't tell a Jacob from a Joseph, an Enoch from a Jebediah. And when Dad finally told him they planned to put him in a home, he became filled with rage and whipped his Bible at a vase in the living room, shattering it like a bottle in a circus gaming concession. His body may have been old, but his limbs still held the strength of a younger man. Then he grabbed his shotgun, hunting knife, and Bible and ran out the door. The police spent days looking for him, but he couldn't be found. It wasn't until weeks later, when a hunter happened upon him in the woods beyond the logging road, that we learned where he was. On the evening when this report reached us, my parents said they would tell the authorities first thing in the morning so he could be apprehended and restrained and kept from harming the community, or worse yet, himself. But hearing word of him created a different kind of mythology in my mind. I pictured him running ridges, wrestling coyotes in his old matted bathrobe, and angling the bulwark of his body against the frontiers of age and death. I decided that I needed to go see him before the institutional wardens got their hands on him. He was holed up in a blown-out cabin in the trees. The door was a greased-over sheet of tin that had been crudely bolted onto a log door frame, and the windows were either cracked or shuttered with plywood. I rode my 4x4 as far as the road would take me and left it by the tree line, completing the journey through the bush on foot. He opened the door, shirtless, disheveled, a smear of charcoal across his forehead, and a lost, wild look in his eye. The cabin had long been abandoned, but it had a wood stove and some old provisions lying around. "Grandson," he said. "Well, hell, boy, come on in. Where's your mother? She know you're here?" I told him she didn't, and he said that was probably best, because she wouldn't want her only son spending time with a crazy old man. But he was glad I came. He threw a few logs on the fire and told me he had been living there since his wife died. When I asked him when that was, he said he couldn't be sure exactly, but that it had been a while. I knew that my grandmother had died of cancer before I was born, but I didn't try to correct him. He slopped some boiled rabbit into a tin bowl and plunked it down in front of me on the makeshift plywood table, and, sitting down beside me, heaved his elbow onto the tabletop, causing the entire thing to pitch up and slam back down onto the sawhorse beneath it, sending the bowl spinning in place. He propped up his head and, leaning forward, stared straight into my pupils like he was interrogating me. I looked down into the bowl and felt his gaze burning into the top of my head. "You know anything about Jesus?" he asked. "I know that believing in him is supposed to bring eternal life," I said. He didn't say anything for a few long seconds, but just kept staring at me with that dissecting gaze. Then he said, "You sure about that?" "No," I said. "Not sure at all." "That's good, son," he said. "Being too sure about anything is a hazard." "But I thought if anyone was sure, it would be you." "Sure about what?" he said. This confused me, and I needed a minute to gather my thoughts. Then I said, "I thought you were sure about the existence of God." "Who said I knew anything about God?" "Well, you're always preaching and telling everybody to repent for the kingdom of heaven," I said. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean I know anything about it. Those are just words." In all his bouts of preaching, I'd never heard him go against Scripture, and while I'd never taken any of his preaching seriously, this reversal unsettled me. Despite everything I had come to know about my grandfather's delusions, I hadn't realized that part of me took comfort in his religion, the knowledge that it was possible to hold such a firm belief in the human soul. But now all of this was suddenly called into doubt. "But don't you mean what you say when the words come out of your mouth?" I said. He thought about my question and looked down at the table and didn't answer for a while. Then he looked back at me and said, "Nobody knows what follows in the life to come." He slammed his fist on the plywood, sending it teetering a second time. "Not me, not you, not your mother or your father, not even the Holy Gospel. Nobody." He stared at the wall. His eyes became vacant for a moment. Then he looked at me clear-eyed, and I thought he returned to his old self, the mischievous old man who used to insult me in the most loving of ways, calling me Muskrat or Skinny Minnie. And even though he didn't say anything, I recognized him in that look in a way that I hadn't in a good long while. but it didn't last. He furrowed his brow, and I could almost see the wave of exhortation that was forming behind his forehead, like he was rifling through some scriptural tome that lived inside his brain. Do you know what happens in the life to come to those who fail to live by the dictates of the Lord? He asked, his face darkening. I don't know what to believe, I said. I mean, does anyone really know what's real and what isn't? He stood up and leaned right over top of me with his fists planted on the table. Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? He was yelling now. The lines on his face darkened into valleys of shadow. His eyes narrowed, haggard, almost deranged. The door was behind me. I stood up, backed toward it, and opened it a crack without turning around. Before I could pull it open fully, he leapt up and slammed it shut with the palm of his hand. He looked at me again with that same drawn expression, and I saw the effort of thinking behind his forehead, as though he were struggling to say something but couldn't get the words out. A shadow of defeat passed over his face. Stepping backward, he reached behind for a chair with his hand, like a man faltering in a room without light. He sank into it and looked at me with tired eyes. I had never seen him look so old. Is this what it means to get old? I thought to myself. He used to sit in his creaky recliner, pour himself a double, and tell stories until I lost track of time. The center of the room at every gathering, he would hold court with tales of fighting wildfires and brushes with death. Dousing flames by air and land, he had been part of dozens of crews in the Northwest. But his most dangerous tale, the one he never talked about, was of a controlled burn, lit intentionally as part of the Ministry of Natural Resources' plan to clear the forest of deadwood. He had gone out with a crew of 7 interns, recent high school grads with barely enough experience to blow out a candle. When a wind picked up off the water, the fire surged, devouring leaves and grass, and rose into a rolling wall of flame that slashed through the forest with terrifying speed. Grandpa knew to head for lower ground and buried himself in a marsh, trusting the wetness and mud to protect him. The fire passed over, singeing his flesh and marking him with third-degree burns that he would carry for the rest of his life. But what scorched him even deeper was the death of the 7 interns under his watch. There was nothing left of the bodies to be buried, and a community of devout Protestants had to accept cremation as the only right for their sons and daughters. He told me that was the day he stopped going to church because for him there was no God. End of discussion. Most nights he'd have just 1 or 2, but every now and then the bottle would get the better of him. By the time he realized the bottle was 3/4 gone, he'd be too drunk to reason with. He'd use the drained bottle as a weapon, slashing the air and cursing at anyone who tried to get near or talk him down. I'd seen this enough to know what whiskey could do, but it scared me all the same. It didn't scare Dad, though. He'd spend the whole time ribbing him like it was more sport than crisis. Okay, old man, he'd say, you can put down that bottle now. This isn't a drunken ass contest. With Dad there, I felt safe, but I wondered how I'd handle the situation if he wasn't. Did I have that same ability to laugh at danger? Grandpa would wear himself out, and Dad would walk him, more like carry him upstairs, and he'd be mumbling about how he couldn't save them. He would tell stories about how, when my father was my age, they'd go hunting together. Dad was a good shot, and that, more than anything, earned him Grandpa's approval. But for me, the thought of bringing down something on four legs with a bullet went against everything I believed about the world. Just as seeing Grandpa, so weak and frail, defied everything I knew about him. I had only held a rifle once, on a hunting trip with Ezra, my mother's little brother. "It isn't hard," Ezra said. "You just point and shoot." I looked through the sights at the deer. You had to be precise in your timing. The moment you faltered was the moment the deer would vanish before you could take your next breath. Ezra had primed me about this the night before as the firelight performed a minuet across the wall in his little two-room wooden shack. A hunter, he said, must switch off all moral discrimination and become a part of the natural law of giving and taking life. "I can't. It's gone too fast and I can't focus," I said. "Well, which is it? Is it that the deer's too fast, or is it that you can't focus?" he said. He got behind me and, looking over my shoulder, put his hand over mine, his finger right over top of mine inside the trigger guard. "Now look and listen, but not too hard. Just stay calm and wait. Breathe," he said, his low words pulsing warm against the back of my ear. Just beyond a stand of cedars, there was a light sound of hooves, a whisper in the brush, and a crunching of leaves. My body felt paralyzed by Ezra's enormous presence holding me in place. "Over there. Do you see?" Ezra whispered and pointed with his left hand to a window of air framed by some leaves in the middle distance, where the deer's head and torso peeked out. Then he squeezed my finger onto the trigger. The shot rang out across the distance, and the deer's head and body disappeared from view. I never knew if we shot the deer. I didn't want to know, and I told Ezra so. So we just got back in his pickup and drove home. Unlike my mother, who was Anishinaabe and kept a candle lit for the possibility of a spirit alive on the land, my father was a staunch atheist. He had learned it from his old man, and when I asked him about whether he had ever doubted this, his answer was an implacable no. I asked him how he faced the idea of his own death, believing to his core that God was nothing more than a soothing fiction that people conjured to allay their fears. He just laughed and told me that he didn't bother wasting his time worrying about things like dying that hadn't happened yet. He used to sneak cigarettes behind my mother's back, and I knew where he stashed them in the garage behind his toolbox because, unlike my mother, I was interested in exploring every inch of the world of strange objects kept on those shelves. In a way, I felt like I knew my father through the meticulously laid socket wrenches, work gloves worn stiff with engine grease and sweat, and the old box of fishing tackle filled with iridescent lures. But my mother knew about his nicotine habit. I understood this because when I started smoking, it was impossible for me to hide from her the smell of tobacco that clung to my skin and clothing. One day I came home early from school to find him smoking a cigarette in front of the house. He wasn't usually that reckless, but I guess he didn't expect anyone to be there. He didn't try to put out the cigarette or hide what he was doing or anything like that. He just kept dragging on it, looking straight at me without flinching. That image of him just smiling at me like that through the smoke is a portrait burned into memory. He knew he had been caught, but he wasn't going to apologize, and that was who he was. It was as if he could use that smile to sidestep any oncoming crisis, the same way he could charm a cop out of giving him a speeding ticket. And when he got sick, that same smile maintained through that crisis as well. Don't mistake me, I'm not saying he didn't suffer, but on balance, he never lost his sense of humor. Before he got sick, my dad and I would go fishing every Sunday. He had this fishing manual that explained how to negotiate the teeming catastrophe of the river. On one page, it showed the subtle distinction of bait and tackle with black and white photographs and the optimal season and time of day for each one's use. On another, techniques for angling into the calm areas behind the jetties and rocks and then reeling hard against the current. The Bible was full of complex allegories and hidden meanings, but this was a religion of casting out one's line and then waiting to see what the river would yield, a creed that was both patient and silent. When he died, I stood by his open casket. His face looked white and placid like a porcelain doll. His arms were by his side, and his navy suit that was starched and pressed reminded me of the ones on the mannequins in the windows of the stores in town. I placed the fishing manual with its pages half falling out in the casket beside his body. Mom didn't say much after he died. We both just kept moving through the routine of each day out of necessity. Instead, she told me a story about her grandfather, the trapper whose image stood in black and white against our hearth with an upright snowshoe held against the background of the tundra. He had been separated from his hunting party when a blizzard set down on the trail, leaving him alone in the middle of the northern wilderness during the coldest part of winter. He found his way to a bear enclosure, and the warmth given off by the bodies of the sleeping animals saved his life. In all the years that portrait stood over our mantel, this story had never been told to me. After this, I came to see her quiet endurance in a new light, as the progeny of a man who slept with grizzly bears. Dad used to wear his work boots in the boat all the time, and when he'd come home, Mom would get mad as hell because he'd forget to take them off, and you'd hear his boot heels making a racket on the hardwood. Sometimes when he wanted to think, he'd go out and chop wood, and the chuck of the axe would float on the night air into the living room, steady and reliable. The house is so quiet now. Been lying here half awake for hours. Every now and then, I look at the clock on the nightstand, but this time I look and the clock face is dark. The power must be out. The train rumbles into earshot. 3 a.m. Its headlight slashes into the room. Then it recedes, and the room is dark again. A memory fills my head like a clattering streak of red and black storming through a dark tunnel. We were playing on the tracks, laying down pennies. When the train reached us, it flattened them, grinding sparks out of the faces of the dead prime ministers. I didn't think then about who they were, or whether they'd gone to heaven or hell. They lived a long time ago, and it didn't matter. But now, thinking about those dead men, the weight of the darkness falls like a demon, straight down on the center of my chest. I get out of bed, go downstairs, and pour a glass of water. My hands are shaking. I sit at the kitchen table and try to catch my breath. I get dressed, pull on my boots, and step outside. The four-wheeler is under its tarp, but I walk on past it. It's a long walk to Grandpa's cabin, several hours through the bush, but I know I'll make it on foot. I grab the shotgun and start walking across the field to where the last furrow runs along the tree line. There's not much to see, just the outline of trees, but the trench line carries my feet to the mouth of the logging road. For the next few hours, it's just the sound of breath, heartbeat, and the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Branches blur into a soft tangle, and the woods carry me along, like it's someone else walking in my body. The cabin appears, silent at the edge of the trees. The door gives way easily. Inside, even in the dark, I know everything is in its place, just like Grandpa left it. Dawn slips in. A pale light brushes the old wooden chair where I sat once, beckoning like a gray ghost. Shapes emerge. The wood stove, the rusted bed frame, the old glass lantern perched on its shelf. All of them slowly returning to form, relics in the morning light. A white cardboard box on the stovetop, and I know it's inside the instant I lay eyes on it. It feels heavy. Inside, a clean half-dozen shells, untouched, like they just came from the store. I take one out. It clicks into the chamber like it was made special for Grandpa's gun. I walk out onto the porch. On the far side of the clearing, a deer, just standing there, watching me. I raise the shotgun, take aim, and fire. It recoils. The stock kicks up and cracks my cheek like the back end of an axe blade. A high ringing of filament in the ears. And then, I'm on my back, can't move. From the same place the deer stood, a figure begins walking towards me. He kneels beside me. He has my face. I pass out. When I come to, the deer is sniffing me, and I can feel its moist nose and warm breath against my cheek. I open my eyes. Getting to my feet, I glance back at where I lay on the ground. The world settles into focus. I start towards home.